The sound of hooves pounding on dry earth announced the arrival of the stagecoach long before it came into view. Lucille Lambert clutched the worn letter in her hands, her knuckles white with tension as the dust cloud on the horizon grew larger. This was it, her new life in St. Elmo, Colorado awaited, along with a husband she had never met. It was 1882, and the spring air carried the scent of sage and promise across the rugged landscape. At 24, Lucille had left everything behind in Boston: her job as a schoolteacher, her small rented room, and the whispers that followed an unmarried woman of her age. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed straightforward. Successful rancher seeks respectable woman for matrimony. Passage paid. The exchange of letters with Garrett Zimmerman had been brief but cordial. Now, as the stagecoach lurched to a stop, she wondered if she had made the greatest mistake of her life. St. Elmo, 15 minutes. The driver called out as Lucille gathered her modest belongings, one trunk containing everything she owned in the world. She smoothed down her navy blue traveling dress, adjusted her hat, and took a steadying breath before stepping down onto Colorado soil. The town was smaller than she had imagined. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small church, and assorted businesses whose purposes she could only guess at. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats paused to look at her, some tipping their hats respectfully, others simply staring with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Lambert." A deep voice called from her right. Lucille turned to see a tall man approaching. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His shoulders were broad, his skin tanned by the sun. As he came closer, she saw eyes the color of a summer sky, crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often. "Mr. Zimmerman?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair with golden highlights. "Garrett Zimmerman, madam. Welcome to St. Elmo." He gestured to a wagon nearby. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." It was. "Educational," Lucille replied, thinking of the 4 days of constant jostling, dust, and the company of strangers. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I reckon that's one way of putting it." He reached for her trunk. "May I?" She nodded, watching as he easily lifted the heavy trunk and secured it in the back of the wagon. He offered his hand to help her up onto the seat, and she took it, noticing the calluses that spoke of hard work. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town," he explained as he climbed up beside her. "Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's good land, getting better every year." As they left the small town behind, Lucille found her voice. "In your letters, you mentioned that you've been in Colorado for 10 years. He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Came out after the war with nothing but hope and a mule. Started working other men's land, saved every penny. Now I've got 300 acres, a decent herd, and a house that needs a woman's touch." He glanced at her briefly. "If you'll have it, we are to be married tomorrow, are we not?" Lucille said, the reality of her situation suddenly pressing down on her. "That was the arrangement." "It was," he agreed. "But I want you to see the place first, meet my foreman and the hands, sleep on it. If you wake up tomorrow and decide Colorado isn't for you, I'll take you back to town and pay for your ticket home." Surprised by his consideration, Lucille studied him. Most men wouldn't offer such a choice. Most men aren't marrying a woman who's traveled halfway across the country on the strength of a few letters, he replied. "Seems only fair you should have a chance to change your mind once you see what you're getting into." They crested a small hill and Garrett pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing toward the valley below. "The double Z." Lucille's breath caught. The ranch spread out before them, a sturdy two-story house painted white with green shutters, a large red barn, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses. Beyond, cattle dotted the grasslands that extended to distant hills. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It's home," he replied simply, but she heard the pride in his voice. When they arrived at the ranch, two men emerged from the barn. One was older with gray streaking his beard, the other young with freckles splashed across his nose and cheeks. "Miss Lambert, this is Henry, my foreman," Garrett said, indicating the older man. "And this is Caleb, who works the horses." "Madam," Henry said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to the Double Z." Caleb shuffled his feet, a blush creeping up his neck. "Pleasure to meet you, miss." "There are two other hands who live in the bunkhouse, Micah and Jeremiah. They're out checking the north pasture today," Garrett explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "Let me show you the house." The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance. The front door opened into a spacious living room with a stone fireplace. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space. To the right was a dining room with a long table that could easily seat 8. Beyond that, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, a pump at the sink, and shelves lined with provisions. "Upstairs are 4 bedrooms," Garrett said. Ours, if you decide to stay, is at the end of the hall. I've had the one next to it made up for you for tonight." He cleared his throat. "I thought you'd want your privacy until we're properly married." Lucille felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for your consideration, Mr. Zimmerman." "Garrett, please." His eyes met hers. "We may be strangers yet, but formality seems unnecessary between two people considering matrimony." "Garrett, then," she agreed, "and you must call me Lucille." He nodded. "I'll bring your trunk up. The washroom is through there if you'd like to freshen up. Supper will be ready in an hour or so." Left alone, Lucille explored the kitchen more thoroughly. It was well stocked but clearly organized by a man's practical hand, rather than with any aesthetic sense. She ran her fingers along the wooden countertop, imagining herself cooking meals here, turning this house into a home. That evening, Henry's wife Martha came from their small cabin nearby to prepare supper. She was a round woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Been telling Garrett for years he needed to find himself a wife," Martha said as she busied herself at the stove. "A man shouldn't live alone, and this place needs children's laughter." Lucille helped set the table, careful with the simple china plates. "We haven't decided for certain yet. He's given me until tomorrow to make up my mind." Martha snorted. "That's Garrett for you. Always worried about doing right by others, even at his own expense." She lowered her voice. "He's a good man, Miss Lambert, one of the best I've known." Supper was a hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The ranch hands ate with gusto, occasionally glancing at Lucille with curious eyes before returning their attention to their plates. "Miss Lambert was a teacher back east," Garrett said during a lull in the conversation. "A teacher?" Henry raised his eyebrows. "We could use one around here. The closest school's in town, and not all the children can make the journey, especially in winter." "Do you have many children in the area?" Lucille asked, her interest piqued. "About a dozen within riding distance," Martha replied. "Some are getting no education at all, poor things." The conversation continued, ranging from the cattle market to the weather to local gossip. Through it all, Lucille observed Garrett. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did contribute, everyone paid attention. There was a quiet authority about him, a steadiness that she found appealing. After supper, while Martha cleared the dishes despite Lucille's offers to help, Garrett suggested they take a walk. "The sunset from the West Ridge is worth seeing," he said. They strolled in companionable silence until they reached a spot overlooking the ranch. The sky was ablaze with color oranges, pinks and purples painting the clouds as the sun descended behind the mountains. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Lucille breathed. "It's one of the reasons I stayed," Garrett said quietly. "Even in the hardest times, when drought killed the grass or winter froze the cattle, I'd see a sunset like this and know I couldn't leave." "What were the other reasons?" she asked, turning to look at him. "Freedom," he replied after a moment's thought. "Space to breathe. The chance to build something that's entirely my own." He met her gaze. "But I've come to realize that building something alone isn't enough." "Hence the advertisement," Lucille said. He nodded. "Hence the advertisement, though now that you're here, I realize how presumptuous it was. Asking a woman to leave everything familiar to marry a stranger. It's not so different from what many women do," Lucille pointed out. "Even those who marry men they've known all their lives are embarking into unknown territory." "I suppose that's true," he conceded. "Still, I want you to know that if you decide to stay, I don't expect you to be subservient. I've seen marriages where the wife is little more than a servant, and that's not what I want." Lucille blinked, surprised by his directness. "What do you want, then?" "A partner," he said simply. "Someone to share the good times and the bad. Someone to build a life with, side by side." His words warmed her more than she cared to admit. In Boston, the few suitors she'd entertained had all expected her to give up teaching once married, to devote herself entirely to household duties and eventually children. None had spoken of partnership. "That's an unusual perspective," she said carefully. Garrett shrugged. "Out here, a man and woman have to rely on each other. There's too much work for rigid roles." He gestured toward the ranch below. "I need someone who can help me run this place, not just keep house in it." As they walked back to the house, Lucille found herself studying the land with new eyes. This could be her home. This man could be her husband. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night in the bedroom next to Garrett's, Lucille lay awake long after the house had fallen silent. She thought of the life she'd left behind in Boston, secure but lonely, respectable but constricted. She thought of Garrett's words about partnership, of the vast beauty of the land, of the possibility of teaching again. When dawn broke, she had made her decision. She found Garrett in the kitchen, brewing coffee. He looked up as she entered, a question in his eyes. "Good morning," she said. "I've been thinking about our arrangement." He set down the coffee pot. "And I would like to stay," she said, her voice steady, "but I have conditions." A slow smile spread across his face. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." "What are they?" "First, I want to continue teaching. If there are children nearby who need education, I want to provide it." He nodded. "We could convert one of the outbuildings into a schoolhouse. The small one near the oak tree would work." "Second," she continued, encouraged by his quick agreement, "I want to learn about the ranch, all of it. I can't be a true partner if I don't understand what you do." "That's fair," he said, "though some of it isn't pretty work." "I'm stronger than I look," she assured him. "Third, I want to write to my friend Sarah in Boston regularly. She's the closest thing to family I have left." "Of course," Garrett said. "We go into town every Saturday for supplies. You can mail your letters then." "And finally," Lucille took a deep breath, "I want us to truly know each other before we share a room. The ceremony can proceed today as planned, but I'd like time before we fully become husband and wife." Garrett's expression softened. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Lucille. Marriage is more than a piece of paper or a shared bed. It's trust, respect, understanding. Those things take time to build." Relief washed over her. "Then we are in agreement." He extended his hand as if sealing a business arrangement. "We are." She placed her hand in his, noting once again the contrast between her smooth skin and his work-roughened palm. "Partners, then." Partners, he echoed, his smile reaching his eyes. They were married that afternoon in the small church in St. Elmo. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, with Henry, Martha, and the ranch hands as witnesses. Lucille wore her best dress, a pale blue silk that she'd saved for special occasions. Garrett had donned a clean shirt and string tie, his hair slicked back with water. The vows were traditional, but when Garrett spoke the words to love and to cherish, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. She responded with a clear voice, conscious that she was making promises to a man she barely knew, yet somehow felt she could trust. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Thomas declared. "You may kiss your bride." Garrett hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was a brief kiss, respectful and restrained, but Lucille felt a spark of something that both thrilled and frightened her. There was a small celebration afterward at the town's only restaurant, where Martha had arranged for a special dinner. The townspeople stopped by to congratulate them and satisfy their curiosity about Garrett Zimmerman's mail-order bride. "You're holding up well," Garrett murmured as they received yet another round of well-wishers. "Small towns run on gossip will be the main topic for at least a week." "Let them talk," Lucille replied with more confidence than she felt. "We know the truth of our arrangement." When they returned to the ranch, her new home, Lucille found herself suddenly nervous. Despite their agreement, she was now legally Mrs. Garrett Zimmerman. The reality of that settled over her as they entered the house. "I've moved my things to the larger bedroom," Garrett said, as if sensing her thoughts. "The one at the end of the hall is yours for as long as you need it to be. Your trunk is already there." "Thank you," she said, grateful for his understanding. "For everything today it was." "More than I expected," he smiled. "Get some rest, Lucille. Tomorrow's Sunday, so things will be quiet, but come Monday, ranch life starts early." True to his word, Garrett began teaching Lucille about ranch operations the following week. She rose before dawn with him, learned to make coffee the way he liked it, strong enough to stand a spoon in, as Henry joked and accompanied him on his morning rounds. "The cattle need checking every day," Garrett explained as they rode out. He had given her a gentle mare named Daisy, patient with inexperienced riders. "We look for signs of illness, make sure they haven't broken through fences, keep predators away." Lucille, who had never been on a horse until the day before, clung nervously to the saddle horn. "How many cattle do you have?" "About 300 head at present," Garrett said. "I'm hoping to expand to 500 within the next few years." As they rode, he pointed out landmarks, explained about water sources and grazing patterns, identified tracks in the dirt. Lucille listened intently, asking questions that sometimes made him pause to consider his answers. "Most men wouldn't bother explaining all this to their wives," she observed as they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. Garrett dismounted and helped her down. "Most men are fools, then. Knowledge isn't worth much if it isn't shared." By the end of the first week, Lucille had blisters on her hands from learning to mend fences, dirt permanently embedded under her fingernails, and sunburn across her nose and cheeks. She had also never felt more alive. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit on the porch and talk. Garrett told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, fighting in the war at 18, drifting west afterward. Lucille shared stories of her childhood in Boston, losing her parents to influenza when she was 16, supporting herself as a teacher. "Weren't there any men in Boston who caught your eye?" Garrett asked one evening. Lucille smiled wryly. "A few. But they all wanted a wife who would give up everything to keep their home and raise their children. None of them saw teaching as a calling worth preserving." "Their loss," Garrett said simply. As April turned to May, Lucille began converting the small outbuilding into a schoolhouse. Garrett and the hands helped move in a large table, benches, and a blackboard that they purchased from St. Elmo's General Store. Word spread, and soon mothers from neighboring ranches were riding over to meet the new teacher. "My Billy's never had a proper day of schooling," said one woman, Mrs. Peterson, whose weathered face belied her young age. "But he's quick with numbers. Has to be, helping his pa with the cattle." "All children deserve education," Lucille assured her. "We'll start next Monday, 3 days a week to begin with." On the first day of school, 8 children ranging from 6 to 14 years old arrived, some having ridden for over an hour to get there. They stared at Lucille with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. "Good morning," she said, smiling at their upturned faces. "I'm Mrs. Zimmerman, and I'm going to be your teacher. But first, I'd like to learn about all of you." By lunchtime, the initial wariness had melted away. The children ate the sandwiches and apples they'd brought while sitting in the shade of the oak tree. Lucille watched them, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't expected to find in Colorado. From the corral, where he was breaking a new horse, Garrett observed her with the children. When she caught his eye, he tipped his hat with a smile that warmed her more than the spring sunshine. As May progressed, Lucille fell into the rhythm of ranch life. Mornings with Garrett, learning the business side of ranching, accounts, contracts, planning. 3 days a week teaching. Evenings helping Martha preserve early vegetables from the kitchen garden. And always, the growing connection with Garrett. They still maintained separate bedrooms, but their conversations deepened. Lucille found herself looking forward to their evening talks on the porch, watching the stars emerge as they shared their thoughts, hopes, and increasingly, their feelings. "I never thought I'd find a woman who would understand this life," Garrett admitted one night. "Who would see the beauty in it, not just the hardship. I never thought I'd find a man who would see me as more than just a potential mother for his children," Lucille responded. "Who would value my mind as much as my domestic abilities." Their hands rested on the porch railing, not quite touching but close enough to feel the warmth between them. In early June, disaster struck. A sudden violent storm swept through the valley, lightning striking the north pasture. By the time Garrett and the hands rode out, fire was spreading rapidly through the dry grass. Lucille watched from the porch as black smoke billowed into the sky. Without hesitation, she hitched the wagon, filled barrels with water, and drove toward the smoke. Martha, seeing her preparations, climbed aboard without a word. When they reached the fire line, the men were fighting a losing battle. Cattle stampeded away from the flames, and the wind drove the fire toward the east fence line. "Get back to the house," Garrett shouted when he saw Lucille. "It's too dangerous." "We brought water," she called back, already unloading a barrel. "And extra blankets to beat out the flames." For a moment he looked like he might argue, but then nodded sharply. "Stay on the wagon, hand out water and blankets as needed. Don't get any closer to the fire line." For hours, they fought the fire. Lucille and Martha kept the water coming, soaking blankets for the men to use against the flames, providing drinking water when they staggered back, faces blackened with soot. At one point the wind shifted and sparks flew dangerously close to the wagon. Without thinking, Lucille grabbed a soaked blanket and beat out the small flames that started in the grass nearby. By nightfall, they had contained the fire, though a significant portion of the north pasture was burned. 2 cows had been lost, and one of the hands, Jeremiah, had burns on his arms that Martha treated with salve. Back at the ranch, exhausted and filthy, Lucille helped Garrett clean a cut on his cheek from a falling branch. "You shouldn't have come out there," he said, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "We're partners, remember," she reminded him, gently applying salve to the cut. "Your battles are mine now." He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "I was scared when I saw you. if anything had happened to you. But it didn't, she said softly, and we saved most of the pasture. That night, after she had bathed away the smoke and dirt, there was a knock at her bedroom door. Garrett stood there, his hair still damp from his own bath, wearing a clean shirt and trousers. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "What you did today. Not many women would have driven toward a wildfire instead of away from it." "Not many men would have wanted them to," she replied. They looked at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then, slowly, Garrett leaned forward. This time when he kissed her, there was nothing restrained about it. His arms went around her waist, pulling her close as his lips moved over hers with a hunger that matched the sudden flaring of her own desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Lucille Zimmerman," he whispered. "God help me, I didn't expect to, but I am." She touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me." "Why?" he asked, his blue eyes searching hers. "Because I've always been independent, I've never needed anyone, and now—" "Needing someone doesn't make you weak," he said gently. "It makes you human." She nodded, tears suddenly pricking at her eyes. "Will you stay with me tonight, just to sleep?" she added quickly. "I don't want to be alone." In answer, he kissed her again, softly this time, then led her to the bed. They lay down together, fully clothed, his arm around her waist, her back against his chest. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, Lucille felt completely at home. The summer brought both challenges and joys. The burned pasture meant they had to move cattle to other grazing areas, some further from the ranch than Garrett liked. The work was constant and often grueling. But each day also brought Lucille and Garrett closer together. In July, they began sharing a bedroom in truth as well as name. Their physical relationship blossomed alongside their emotional connection, each discovery bringing them closer together. Lucille found herself thinking less and less of her life in Boston, and more about the future they were building together. The schoolhouse thrived as well. By August, Lucille had 12 students, and parents were reporting noticeable improvements in their children's abilities. She instituted a lending library using books she ordered from Denver, and soon even some of the adults in the area were borrowing volumes. "You've changed this place," Garrett said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching lightning flicker on the distant horizon. "In just a few months, you've made it more than just a successful ranch. You've made it a center for the community." "We've changed it," she corrected him. "Together." He squeezed her hand. "I have something to show you tomorrow. I've been working on it in my spare time." The next morning, after breakfast, he blindfolded her and led her outside. "No peeking," he warned, guiding her carefully across the yard. When he removed the blindfold, Lucille gasped. Before her stood a small building she hadn't noticed being constructed, a proper schoolhouse with windows, a door, and even a small bell tower on top. "Garrett," she breathed, "when did you?" "The hands and I have been working on it during evenings and early mornings," he explained, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "Do you like it?" "Like it, I love it." She threw her arms around his neck. "It's perfect." Inside were proper desks instead of benches, a larger blackboard, shelves for books, and a small stove for winter heating. "I thought with winter coming, the other building wouldn't be warm enough," Garrett said. "And since the school is becoming so important to everyone." Lucille turned to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you," she said, the first time she had said the words directly. "I love you, Garrett Zimmerman." His smile lit up his entire face. "And I love you, Lucille Zimmerman, more than I ever thought possible." As summer turned to fall, the ranch prepared for winter. Hay was cut and stored. Repairs were made to buildings. Livestock was evaluated for which animals would be kept through the cold months. The pace was relentless, but Lucille found she enjoyed the physical work, the tangible results of her labor. In late September, she realized she had missed her monthly cycle. A second missed cycle in October confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was with child. She told Garrett one evening after supper, both nervous and excited. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy, tenderness, concern for her well-being. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, holding her hands in his. "Truly, I am," she assured him. "Though I'll need to find someone to take over the school for a while after the baby comes. Martha's daughter, Elizabeth, is finishing her schooling in Denver," Garrett said thoughtfully. "She'll be back next spring and was hoping to teach. The timing might work perfectly." As Lucille's body changed with the growing child, so too did her relationship with Garrett. He was attentive without being smothering, concerned without limiting her. When she insisted on continuing to teach through the winter, he helped arrange for older students to escort her to and from the schoolhouse on snowy days. Winter in Colorado was harsh but beautiful. Snow blanketed the land, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical. The work didn't stop. Animals still needed feeding. Water holes needed breaking when they froze over, but the pace slowed somewhat. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Garrett often reading aloud while Lucille sewed baby clothes. Sometimes they would simply talk, making plans for the spring, discussing names for the child, sharing dreams for the future. "I never expected this," Lucille confessed one night as they lay in bed, Garrett's hand resting on the swell of her belly. "When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, perhaps companionship. I never imagined love." "Nor did I," he admitted. "I thought I was too set in my ways, too independent for real partnership. You proved me wrong in the best possible way." In February, during a rare, mild spell, they received an unexpected visitor. A stagecoach pulled up to the ranch, and a woman in an expensive traveling suit stepped down, looking around uncertainly. "Sarah," Lucille called in disbelief, recognizing her friend from Boston. Sarah Douglas turned, her face lighting up. "Lucille, oh my goodness, look at you." Her eyes widened at Lucille's obviously pregnant state. The women embraced, both talking at once until Garrett cleared his throat behind them. "Oh, Sarah, this is my husband, Garrett." "Garrett, this is my dearest friend, Sarah Douglas." Garrett tipped his hat. "Miss Douglas, welcome to the Double Z." Sarah stayed for 2 weeks, initially shocked by the rustic conditions but gradually coming to understand what Lucille loved about her new life. She watched Lucille teaching her students, observed her easy rapport with the ranch hands, and saw the deep connection she shared with Garrett. "I came prepared to rescue you," Sarah admitted their last night together. "When your letters became so enthusiastic about ranch life, I thought perhaps you were trying to convince yourself as much as me." Lucille laughed. "And now I see that you've found exactly where you belong," Sarah said, "with a man who truly sees you as an equal." After Sarah's departure, Lucille felt renewed appreciation for the life she and Garrett had built. As her pregnancy progressed, she found herself contemplating the child's future, hoping he or she would inherit Garrett's strength and integrity. On a stormy April night, Lucille went into labor. Martha served as midwife, with Garrett pacing anxiously outside until the first cries of his son filled the house. When he was finally allowed in, he approached the bed where Lucille lay holding a small bundle, her face tired but radiant. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a dusting of dark hair. Garrett sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one finger gently touching the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "What shall we name him?" I was thinking William after your father, Lucille suggested. William Henry Zimmerman. William, Garrett repeated, testing the name. Will, a good, strong name. He leaned down to kiss first his son's forehead, then his wife's lips. Thank you. For what? For coming west, for staying. For giving me a family. His eyes, usually so steady, shimmered with unshed tears. For being my partner in all things. As spring blossomed across the ranch, Lucille and Garrett settled into parenthood. The school temporarily closed as promised, with Elizabeth taking over for the final month of the term. Lucille found motherhood both more exhausting and more rewarding than she had anticipated. Little Will was a good baby, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. By summer, Lucille was ready to resume teaching, though now with Will often sleeping in a cradle beside her desk. The students were delighted with the baby, the older girls taking turns holding him during breaks. Garrett would sometimes bring lunch to the schoolhouse, as much to see his wife and son as to provide the meal. One afternoon in late August, just over a year after their wedding, Garrett found Lucille sitting under the oak tree, watching Will practice rolling over on a blanket. He sat beside her, passing her a letter that had arrived in town that morning. It's from the Territorial Education Board, he explained. They've heard about our school and want to officially recognize it. There would be some funding, books, maybe even another teacher eventually. Lucille scanned the letter, excitement building. This would mean we could accept more students, perhaps even offer advanced studies for the older ones. She looked up at him. Did you arrange this? He shook his head. Not directly. But I did invite the territorial superintendent to stay with us when he was passing through last month. He seemed impressed with what you've accomplished. What we've accomplished, she corrected him, leaning against his shoulder. None of this would have been possible without your support. They sat in companionable silence, watching their son explore the world around him with the single-minded focus of a baby discovering his capabilities. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on land that had recovered from the previous year's fire, greener and more lush than before. I was thinking, Garrett said eventually, that we might expand the house next spring. Add a proper library for you, maybe another bedroom or two. Planning for more children already, Lucille teased, though the idea warmed her heart. Planning for whatever the future brings, he replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. As long as we face it together. Together, she agreed, turning her face up for his kiss. As the sun began to set, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant hues, they gathered their son and walked hand in hand back to the house they had made into a home. The journey from mail-order bride to beloved wife and mother had been unexpected, challenging, and ultimately more rewarding than Lucille could ever have imagined. And it had all begun with a man who wanted not a servant, but a partner. 10 years later, the Double Z had grown into one of the most prosperous ranches in Colorado. The small schoolhouse had expanded into a proper school with 2 teachers, Lucille, and a young woman from Denver serving over 30 students from the surrounding area. Will, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his father's love of the land, had been joined by 2 sisters, Emma, age 8, and Grace, age 5. The house had expanded as well, with the promised library, additional bedrooms, and a larger kitchen where Lucille still insisted on doing most of the cooking herself, despite their increased prosperity allowing for hired help. On their 10th anniversary, Garrett surprised Lucille with a trip to Denver, leaving the children in Martha's capable hands for a week. They attended the theater, dined in fine restaurants, and even visited a photographer to have a formal portrait taken. Garrett in a suit, Lucille in a fashionable green dress that set off her auburn hair, now showing the first strands of silver at the temples. On their last night in Denver, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Garrett presented her with a small velvet box. "What's this?" Lucille asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Open it and see," he urged. Inside was a gold locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of their family, on one side herself, Garrett, and the 3 children, and on the other, an inscription: "To my partner in all things, GZ." Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. At 44, his hair was threaded with gray, lines of experience etched around his eyes and mouth, but his gaze still held the same steady warmth that had first drawn her to him. "I love it," she said, holding out the locket for him to fasten around her neck. "And I love you, more with each passing year." "When I placed that advertisement," Garrett said, his fingers lingering on her skin as he secured the clasp, "I hoped for a practical arrangement. Someone to keep house, help with the ranch, maybe provide children someday." He turned her to face him. "What I got was so much more. You've been my strength, my counsel, my joy. You've made me a better man, a better rancher, a better father. And you've given me freedom I never thought possible," Lucille replied, reaching up to touch his face. "The freedom to be fully myself, to teach, to build, to love without constraint." Back at the Double Z, life continued its seasonal rhythms. Will grew tall and strong, showing a talent for horsemanship that made his father proud. Emmer revealed a mind for numbers that Lucille nurtured, bringing advanced mathematics books from Denver for her to study. Little Grace, the baby of the family, charmed everyone with her sunny nature and surprising artistic ability. As St. Elmo and the surrounding area developed, Lucille's school gained recognition throughout Colorado. Several of her former students had gone on to higher education in Denver or even back east. The territorial governor himself had visited once, praising the educational standards she maintained despite the frontier location. Garrett's ranching innovations, crossbreeding for hardier cattle, rotation grazing to preserve grasslands, careful water management brought agricultural experts to the Double Z to observe his methods. The small ranch he had started with hope and determination had grown to over 1,000 acres, with several families living and working on the property. Through it all, Lucille and Garrett maintained the partnership they had established in those early days. Major decisions were made together, each respecting the other's expertise in their respective domains, but always consulting, always considering the other's perspective. On summer evenings, they still sat on the porch watching the sunset, sometimes surrounded by their children, sometimes alone together in companionable silence. They had grown comfortable with each other in the way of long married couples, able to communicate with a glance or a touch, yet they never took each other for granted. You ever wonder what would have happened if you decided to return to Boston that first day? Garrett asked one such evening as they watched the last light fade from the sky. Lucille considered the question. "Sometimes. I imagine I would have continued teaching, perhaps eventually become a headmistress at a girls' school. It would have been a good life, I suppose." She turned to look at him, this man who had become the center of her world. "But not as good as this one." He smiled, the expression as warm and genuine as it had been the day she agreed to stay. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank God you chose to take a chance on a rough rancher and the wild lands of Colorado. The best decision I ever made," she said, leaning against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "And one I would make again in a heartbeat." As night fell over the Double Z, bringing with it the chorus of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle, Lucille Zimmerman, once a mail-order bride with uncertain prospects, felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She had found love where she least expected it, with a man who had wanted not a servant but a partner. Together, they had built something enduring: a home, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. It was, she reflected as Garrett's arm tightened around her shoulders, everything she had never known she wanted. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.